So I'd like to thank you all for attending the lecture this evening, especially our freshmen who have not yet started their study of Plato here at St. John's College. Although this lecture is not an introduction to Kierkegaard, I've got it on my brain, to Plato, I tried to make it as much like Kierkegaard as possible. No, I tried to make it as useful to beginners as I could, as useful to people unfamiliar with Plato as I could. I think you know that I've provided a handout, just a few words about it. So it has passages that I'll be quoting, obviously. It also has some other relevant passages that I won't be quoting, but I included them as a bonus. I think there are so many of them that it would be kind of tedious and awkward to constantly tell you, look at the handout. So I'll just say that the quotations in the handout are in the same order in which they're used in the lecture. So you'll probably be able to find them if I remember to include them. All right. Okay, thank you. So when I told a preschool teacher that I was writing a lecture on Plato, she replied that she knew quite a lot about Plato and that her students worked with it extensively. In case you don't know what Plato is, I'll define it, since a Platonic investigation is careful to define its terms. Plato is a colorful and non-toxic molding clay for young people. The preschool teacher's wordplay was apt, because play molds children as if they were dough, and because Plato thinks that the play of children is especially important for the formation of their character. You might not think so, but play is a serious topic. One reason I say this is that many of us, even non-children, play a lot, and anything that we do voluntarily for much of our lives is a topic that is worthy of serious consideration. Another reason that play is important is that it brings us joy. When we play, we delight in using our human capacities to move, think, and speak strategically, creatively, and beautifully. Another sign that we deem play to be important is that we conceive of many things in life as play. By the way, is the mic working correctly? Thanks. So a drama at the theater is called a play, and the actors there used to be called players. We also speak of playing music, and some songs have preludes, others have interludes, and still others have postludes, which is to say, etymologically, that songs have foreplay, or in-between play, or after play. More generally, art produces illusion, and the etymology of the word illusion contains the Latin word for play. One reason that that art is illusion or play is that it pretends things are otherwise than they actually are, or explores the realm of possibility. It is also striking that sex is often talked about as play. Through language, we dwell in and are immersed in play. For whenever we think at all abstractly, we use metaphors, and metaphors involve wordplay. We need to play with words in order to think about new things, and to think about realities that have something about them that is not merely physical. For example, when we say that we understand something, we playfully pretend that we are standing under the object of our thought, bearing up the weight of its being or meaning. When Descartes says, "I think, therefore I am," his choice of words in the Latin in which he wrote, cogito ergo sum, suggests that he is a being because he drives his thoughts together, say, like sheep that are wandering about and getting separated or lost. Another reason that play is important, or a serious topic, is that we do many things better if we do them at least in a partly playful spirit. A conversation, even a conversation about serious matters, may go better if it is playful in the right ways and to the right degree. This is something quite worthy of pondering. Why is it that seriousness needs playfulness? It is not enough to be told not to be too serious or not to be too playful. It is hard to combine seriousness and playfulness in the right way. A correct combination is not like a recipe in which one is told to measure out 1 cup of play, and 4 cups of seriousness. Art and good judgment are required for fruitfully synthesizing playfulness and seriousness, which is sinfulness. So you can see, I hope, that play is a serious topic. It is a large part of life. It is joy in the free and creative use of our human abilities, sometimes quite important abilities. We think of many valuable parts of life as play. We are able to conceive abstract ideas of things that are not merely physical, partly because we or our remote ancestors play or played with words in order to create the metaphors that are inevitably involved in abstract concepts. And many serious activities are helped to achieve their vital purposes by an artful infusion of play. Plato agrees that play is a serious matter. According to him, the serious man has need of much playfulness. A serious man himself, Plato is often playful. He wrote a lot, and he explained that writing cannot avoid being playful, even when the author wants to be ever so serious. Since writing is inevitably playful, Plato embraced this necessity and wrote dialogues, which are more playful than dry treatises, in that they dramatize the playful give and take of a living conversation. If he had said that writing is essentially playful, and then written somber essays, his theory and his practice would have been comically and fatally at odds with one another. Moreover, Plato himself does not appear in the dialogues that he wrote. Thus he is elusive, and the etymology of elusive is playing away from, or playfully hiding from view. Given that Plato is elusive, strictly speaking, I should not be talking so confidently about what he thinks or says, and you should bear in mind that I am playfully pretending to speak for him when he is a hard fellow to nail down. Not only is Plato playful, but the main speaker in most of his dialogues is playful too, namely Socrates. One of the main aspects of his playfulness is his famous irony, which involves elusively making it difficult for others to know when he is serious and when he is jesting. Sometimes he says ludicrous things as though he were serious. Sometimes he says serious things as though he were jesting. Obviously, Plato's elusiveness and Socrates' irony create difficulties of interpretation, which we can deal with perhaps only by being seriously careful and playfully flexible. Besides saying that no books are worthy of much seriousness, Socrates also thinks that even some seemingly serious conversations should be described as play. You might have thought that Socrates regards his conversation about justice and the best life in the Republic as a serious matter. But in fact, he describes that conversation as play. It's in the handout. And I think that's rather surprising. The Greek word for play and the Greek word for serious occur in almost every dialogue of Plato that we read at St. John's College, often many times. I know that because I have taught freshman seminar many times in the last 4 years. In these dialogues, one of the main activities is an attempt to define important or serious things like virtue, justice, knowledge, or love. There are also episodes within dialogues that involve trying to define a term that is secondary or subordinate to the main topic. Curiously, even though Plato often brings up play and judges it to be a serious matter, he wrote no dialogue in which the main theme is play. There is not even a small investigation into what play is anywhere in Plato's extensive writings. There is one dialogue, however, as we shall see, that has a definition of play, but this definition is merely asserted with very little explanation. So, given that Plato doesn't dramatize an investigation into the nature and right use of play, but nevertheless talks much about it and says that it is important, I will attempt in this lecture to piece together what he seems to think play is, and some of the ways that he thinks it ought to be used. Let me repeat this. I just realized probably I'm not as clear about this as I should be. So what I'll be doing for the first half of the lecture is trying to say what Plato thinks play is. And then in the second part, I'll be trying to talk about some of the ways that he thinks play should be used. So as we work towards a definition, we should bear in mind that play is an exceptionally rich, flexible, and elusive concept. And that makes it hard to define. Its very flexibility and malleability makes it hard to put limits around it. An interesting piece of evidence of its flexibility is that play is used with exceptionally many prepositions in English. We can play with someone or something, play for, play against, play into, play out, play up, play along, play at, play around, play down, play to, play on, and play into. It is fitting that we play so much with the concept of play. If play essentially involves flouting actualities and discovering possibilities in order creatively to bring about something new, or in order to transcend our current limitations, then it is proper that we collude to help the word play to mix promiscuously with so many prepositions. Let's consider some of Plato's words for play, namely paideia, which is a noun, and paidzo, which is a verb. These words are derived from or related to a Greek word for child, pais, and their meanings are in keeping with their connection to children. According to the Liddell and Scott Lexicon of Ancient Greek, these words signify childish play, a game, a jest, or a dance. Plato's use of the words for play is consistent with this definition, but, of course, also richer and deeper. So instead of going straight to the definition, I'll look at what someone in Plato's dialogue says is the origin of play. The Athenian Stranger, who is the main speaker in Plato's laws, has some interesting suggestions about the origin of play. He says that youth likes to jump, frolic, or caper in order to express its exuberance and joy in life. But typically, or not always, we don't want to jump around in a merely chaotic manner. We also want to impose order, rhythm, or harmony on our frolicking, and thus turn it into something beautiful, like a song or a dance. Using the Athenian Stranger's suggestions about the origin of play, we may make a first provisional hypothesis that play is a joyful, impractical, exuberant, and beautiful use of our powers in a way that has an appropriate orderliness or rhythm. The Athenian Stranger says that he calls an activity play when it doesn't do any harm or benefit worthy of serious consideration. It's probably important to look carefully at that in the handout. Notice that this definition, if I may call it a definition, seems to imply that play and seriousness are opposites, or at least highly opposed. Since the definition connects seriousness with benefit and harm, we may conclude that the serious has to do with good and bad. If we consult the lexicon, we find that the Greek word for serious, namely spoudios, can mean many things: speedy, eager, earnest, making a vigorous effort, good, excellent, difficult, painful, and troubling. If something inspires people to move fast, to exert themselves in order to overcome troubles and difficulties, to endure pains, and to be earnest in seriousness, then it seems likely to be good or excellent, and the serious pursuit of that thing is likely to make people good or excellent themselves. Plato adds to the dictionary definition of play when he indicates that to be serious about something is to honor it and to care for or about it. So now I'm going to return to this definition that play is something that doesn't do serious harm or benefit. This definition seems to me defective in a couple of ways, and I think the stranger himself would completely agree with this complaint. One obvious defect in the definition is that it doesn't say anything positive about play, but merely says what play is not. A definition that merely says what something is not does not quite express the essence of the thing as well as we would hope. The main defect of the definition is its implication that play and seriousness are opposites. The Athenian Stranger does not consistently present them as opposites, though. Sometimes he describes the same activity as both playful and serious. But if they were opposites, such a combination seems either impossible or to call for an explanation, which the stranger doesn't give. The stranger also indicates that play can be orderly and measured, and that kind of sounds seriousness. Parmenides, in the dialogue named after him, says that his seemingly very serious discourse on the one should be described as playing at a work-like game. Notice the paradox in the idea of a work-like game, and the suggestion of the possibility of a profound intimacy between play and its opposite, work. The Athenian Stranger describes some play as noble, and noble things seem to be serious. Most tellingly, the stranger speaks of some play as doing serious harm, and of other play as having a serious goal. I think there's a good quotation in the handout. In particular, he and Socrates agree that the education of children should be done through play. I'm not going to be talking about that education there. Education should be done through play because the play of children forms their character, and therefore can do harm or benefit worthy of serious consideration. Therefore, I think it's pretty clear that play is not the opposite of seriousness, according to the Athenian Stranger, despite his misleading definition. Just as there are elements of play in seriousness, which I've been arguing, there are also elements of seriousness in play. We saw that according to Plato, to be serious about something means to care about it. But when we play a game, we often care immensely about something in it. Putting a ball in a basket, for example, or more generally, winning honor by means of some excellence or accomplishment that people admire or value. What then should we do about the Athenian Stranger's apparent contradiction when he posits play and seriousness as opposites, but then treats them as though they're compatible? To begin working at this, I think it will be useful to play with the concept of illusion. Play, say, the play that we can see in a game, involves pretending or make-believe. What we do in the make-believe of play, say, eluding a person or getting caught in a game of chase, does not as such involve any ethical, political, medical, or financial harm or benefit. Therefore, in an obvious sense, playful activity is not beneficial or harmful. But of course, the things done in play can benefit or harm us in other ways. People can be physically injured in play, and that's harmful. Or they can become physically robust and strong through play, and that's beneficial. If a form of play makes people courageous, courteous, fair-minded, or habituates them to work hard at something, then it does benefit. But if it makes people inclined to cheat, excessively vain or proud, or disinclined to do more serious things because they are obsessed with frivolities, then it can do harm. Thus, this seems pretty obvious, play is in some way serious and in others not. What people do or have done to them within the illusion of play is not as such serious. But what happens in play can have serious consequences beyond the veil of illusion. By the way, a thinker's version of make-believe is thinking hypothetically. The thinker pretends that something is true in order to play out its consequences. Another way of saying that play is not practical is to say that it creates an artificial world. and that the players become immersed in the game and thereby transcend the pedestrian, everyday concerns of life. Therefore, play is a kind of transcendence of the ordinary world. When we are possessed by the spirit of play, we forget all the practical purposes of ordinary life. Because play can be engaged in for its own sake, it is like many of the best things in life, which we also do for their own sake. Part of what makes play an end in itself is that it is pleasurable or joyful. The pleasure comes partly from being freed from cares and partly from using one's capacities fully. Some capacities, not all, obviously. Although people who are playing create or immerse themselves in illusion, they don't create out of nothing. In order to create something new, play imitates actual things. We can see this in many games, which imitate various things like war, politics, finance, or hunting. Therefore, imitation is a major part of play, and Socrates explicitly says in Book 10 of the Republic that imitation is a kind of play, especially imitation that we find in works of art. For example, a painting is an imitation of the visual appearance of something, and Aristotle says that a tragedy is an imitation of human action. Socrates worries about imitation because it is often mistaken for the real thing, or believed to have more truth or reality than it actually does, so that it deludes and confuses us about important matters. Even though Socrates sees all sorts of problems with imitations, he nevertheless often makes use of them. He creates images in order to help people understand what he is saying. Perhaps he creates them also in order to aid his own understanding. In his autobiographical account of his development as a thinker, this is in the Phaedo, he explains that he eventually decided not to try to look directly at things or at reality, but to use accounts or speeches as a means of knowing things. And, I propose, accounts in speech are likenesses of things, at least in part. If the speech is a good likeness or imitation of reality, then there will be something serious about it. But if it is a poor likeness, then it will be a purveyor of dangerous illusion. This is a big claim. Perhaps it will seem controversial to you, and I don't have the time here to defend it, namely the claim that likenesses, logoi, that logoi, or accounts, are, according to Socrates, images or likenesses or imitations of reality. Just putting it out there, and you can bring it up in the question period if you like. To sum up the current line of thought, play often involves imitation, and imitation can be more or less serious, depending on how well it helps us to discover or know something. Play can be faithfully imitative and help us to learn, or it can be irresponsibly and deceptively imitative and thus harmful. All right, now for an abrupt change, which might make you suspect something. The Athenian Stranger likens play to drunkenness. Drunk people are often playful, though of course they can be amorous, melancholy, or belligerent. The stranger is not talking about irresponsible drinking to excess, but about drunkenness that is carefully supervised by sober and rational guides. So what are the playful traits of drunkenness? The stranger says that it heals the austerity of old men. That is, it is a remedy for their excessive or even crippling seriousness. He also says that play makes old men soft and pliant. That is, it helps them to become free of the ruts into which they have fallen over the years. It gives them freedom and willingness to try something new, to experiment, or to explore a surprising idea. In other words, drunkenness helps free a person from habitual and conventional beliefs and practices. This freedom from convention makes people more capable of seeking truth. They become more willing to try out novel or shocking ideas, to experiment, play with, and explore possibilities, even when these possibilities flout ideas that are held dear by society at large. Drunk people often become less self-conscious, more willing to risk making mistakes, and they make a lot, less embarrassed when they are caught making mistakes, and thus more apt to make progress in thinking, if their drunkenness is ordered and moderated by rational sobriety. By the way, I don't want to get into trouble with the authorities. It seems, I'm not yet ready to make that disclaimer. I'm still getting into trouble right now. So it seems to me that as students at St. John's College progress from their freshman year to their senior year, many of them become in many ways like old men. From making many mistakes, they have learned to be cautious and responsible, or to suspend judgment until they know more. And I'm serious. And of course, learning to be cautious and to doubt oneself is right and proper. But a good conversation also needs, besides humble caution, something like drunkenness. Not literal drunkenness. Let me stress this. Not even on the night of the symposium. Not literal drunkenness. Instead, I am talking about metaphorical drunkenness, or philosophical intoxication. This metaphorical drunkenness is willing to be a little wild, to offer up hypotheses to be examined, to make an attempt, or to experiment with a possibility. In the Platonic dialogue called the Meno, after the character named Meno has been refuted several times by Socrates, he becomes very cautious and unwilling to make an attempt to answer Socrates' questions. It's pretty striking. I think that he has become too afraid of being refuted. There is also a famous section in the histories in which Herodotus relates that the Persians deliberated questions of political importance, first drunk and then sober, or first sober, then drunk. They saw that they needed to be open-minded, wild, creative, experimental, unconventional on the one hand, but also careful, cautious, critical, and rational on the other. Similarly, sometimes in seminar there needs to be a creative hypothesis, and sometimes there needs to be slow, careful, and cautious examination. We might say that we need to play in a measured manner, as Socrates says that he and Phaedrus played in a measured manner in their most famous conversation with one another. Perhaps another image will be helpful. A fool can be pretty useful. A king's fool or jester is a character who was given the freedom to say things that convention, propriety, or a concern for personal safety prevent other people from saying. The fool uses his license playfully to say things that might need saying, and then the king's task is to exercise rational judgment to assess what the fool says. In inquiry, all of us should try to play both the part of the fool and the part of the wise king. Here's the disclaimer. Incidentally, please do not foolishly use this lecture as an excuse to become excessively wild in class or in your papers. If you are a freshman, you are already probably a bit wild, and therefore probably need to learn to be cautious, reasonable, slow, careful, and methodical in interpreting and talking about great books. That's why I've been such a tyrant about being slow and methodical in freshman seminar. But if you are a senior, perhaps you've become tentative and fearful, like austere old men, and need to remember that thinking should be not only measured and rational, but also frolicking, capering, and cavorting. So I may have given the misleading impression that play in conversation mostly means saying surprising things, and it does mean that. But more often what it means is to play with, entertain, or flirt with ideas other than one's own, the ideas of one's classmates, or suggestions from a tutor, and above all, the surprising ideas in the great book that we are interpreting together. Okay. I was going to be really serious and warn you again, but I trust you. Just going to move on. Before proceeding, it will be useful to sum up what Plato seems to mean by play. Play is childlike and therefore exuberant and joyful. It involves a separation from politics, labor, money-making, ethics, cares and worries, and in general from all practical life. Therefore, theory or theorizing is playful. Play, at least in part, maybe that's an exaggeration, play achieves separation or transcendence of ordinary life by creating an illusion or a make-believe world. In order to create this make-believe world, the players selectively imitate some aspects of the real world. Play's connection to illusion, make-believe, and imitation link it to art, and art is a kind of play. Because of its separation from the real world, play does not typically and directly do great harm or great good to players as real people in the real world. But it can have immense indirect offense by molding the mind and character of the players. Plato cares deeply about play, owing to its considerable indirect power to do good or harm. Play is like drunkenness, in that someone who plays can or should be experimental, flexible, uninhibited, and not highly self-conscious. Play can be disorderly, or even somewhat chaotic, but it can also be orderly, beautiful, and noble, so that song and dance are forms of play. And it's the orderly, beautiful, and noble kinds of play that Plato wishes to make use of. An important reason that play is a serious thing, to do either considerable good or harm, is that it is deeply rooted in human nature, in the human desire to frolic exuberantly and joyfully and free from care, in the human desire to experiment without fear of disastrous real-world consequences, in the desire to imitate things, and in the desire to transcend actuality and create something new, but by pretending that one is someone else or that things are otherwise than they actually are. Now that we have an idea of what play and seriousness are, let us talk about their role in life and how they should be related to one another. The Athenian Stranger in the Laws says that the affairs of human beings are not worthy of great seriousness, and yet it is necessary to be serious about them. How then does one manage to be both serious and not serious about the same things? The Stranger also says that one should live out one's days playing at certain games, namely, sacrificing, singing, and dancing. This is a surprising statement in several ways. If for a moment we ignore sacrificing, the recommendation to live singing and dancing sounds like an invitation to a party. But the Stranger, I think, has something else in mind. A large part of the point of singing and dancing is to do things in a beautiful, measured, orderly, and graceful way. So a large part of what the Stranger means by living playfully is to do things beautifully, gracefully, and artfully. But what about sacrifices? What does it mean to live making sacrifices? Sacrificing is an activity that expresses reverence for the gods, or worship. We might also say that sacrificing expresses that one is serious about the gods, that one thinks the gods are more important than anything, including oneself. Worshipful sacrifice expresses that those who worship are in need of something greater and more serious than themselves. If they also sing and dance as they sacrifice, then they show that they are not worthy of great seriousness. But by sacrificing at the same time, they express their belief that God or the gods are worthy of great seriousness. Thus, a life of singing, sacrificing, and dancing involves a combination of playfulness and seriousness. And the playfulness and seriousness are not externally related to one another, but essentially. If one is serious about the gods, as one's superiors or rulers, then it is necessary to be playful about oneself. But the reverent worshipper of the gods cannot be frivolous and flippant when he is playful about himself. Therefore he sings and dances in honor of the god as beautifully and gracefully as he can. The Athenian Stranger says a quite striking thing about religious play in the following words, and this is in the handout. Let's consider each of us living beings to be a divine puppet, put together either for the gods to play with or for some serious purpose, which we don't know. Notice that the stranger does not assert that each living thing is a divine puppet, but says, let's consider this to be so. He's making a playful suggestion. He leaves it open whether the puppets are merely toys for the gods to play with, or whether the puppets have a serious purpose. In another place, he again says that the citizens of the state he is describing should live like puppets for the most part, but should also consider themselves as sharing small portions of truthfulness. These small portions of truthfulness make them serious to a degree. In another passage, the stranger is less tentative and asserts that by nature God is worthy of complete seriousness, and that a human being has been designed as a certain plaything of God, and that being a toy of God is really the best thing about a human being. So what does it mean to be a plaything or a toy of God? If God is superlatively serious, why does he need a toy? Does God grow tired of his serious projects and need rest and diversion? I doubt the stranger thinks this. The stranger says that a best thing about a human being is that it is a plaything of God. This suggests that even though a human being is a plaything, it has something like a serious purpose, because it is the plaything of God. If human beings are playthings for God, then God is at least sometimes paying attention to them. And they are divine attempts to make something worthy of divine attention. Maybe they are imitations of God, things that share divine traits, like rationality. How then should a person who regards himself or herself as God's toy think and feel about himself or herself? One is a toy, so one is playful about oneself. But one is God's toy, somewhat worthy of God's attention, so one is also serious about oneself. If things go badly in one's life and one suffers, then the sufferer thinks that his sufferings are noticed by God and may be part of a divine plan. He is not resentful about the suffering and does not lament excessively over his suffering, but is grateful to have a role in the divine game. Perhaps that game has a serious purpose. At least it has a serious spectator. Perhaps the game educates a person, as games for children often educate them. Maybe the game is a sort of test. In summary, the participant in the divine game has a sense of what is serious and regards himself as secondary and subordinate to that most serious thing, and is therefore playful about his own activities. So here I'm going to make a fast move, which would take a while perhaps to justify. If one lives singing, dancing, and sacrificing, presumably one is not practicing politics. I think that the laws probably bears that out, but we can't go into that. But some people need to practice politics. So it seems that when the stranger says that we should live singing, dancing, and sacrificing, he is not talking about how everyone should live, but about how ordinary citizens should. We can wonder then how statesmen and their subordinate officers should live, and whether play has a part in their activities. Similarly, if people live singing, dancing, and sacrificing, then they are also not engaged primarily in the philosophical pursuit of truth. How then do philosophers live, and what is the role of play in their lives, if it has one, and how does their play relate to their seriousness? So I'm going to speculate here using the Phaedrus. which contains the dialogue, the Phaedrus, which contains a famous critique of the written word. A major premise of its critique of books is that the philosopher's proper activity is pursuing truth, and that knowing and pursuing truth is quite serious. The problem with writing is that, when it is compared to the mind and conversation of a living philosopher, it contains little truth. And because writing contains little truth, there is of necessity much playfulness in all writing, at least in all writing about how one should live and about the nature of things. But why do books contain little truth? Socrates explains that a book is not as solid as the living speech of someone who has knowledge. It is not as clear and complete as this living speech. When you see the ways in which a book is not as clear and complete as it should be, and you ask it a question that seeks clarification or a more complete explanation, it cannot answer you as adequately as a living knower can, but keeps on saying the same thing. It cannot tailor what it says to your specific and individual needs in the way that a wise person who knows you could. It also cannot come to its own defense against powerful objections. Now, of course, this critique of writing is itself somewhat playful since it occurs in a written text. Moreover, as we learn at St. John's College, great writings do not just say the same thing over and over to us. With rereading, they say something new. They come alive when we talk about them with other people and surprise us with their hidden depths. If we ask them a question, it often turns out that, with the help of the book and other readers, we find an answer. But my purpose is not to evaluate or even to fully present the critique of writing in the Phaedrus, but to use it as a clue to the relation of play and seriousness in the thinking and speaking of a philosopher, or, better, more humbly, in the thinking of people who are trying to become philosophers. That's more relevant. Here is my playful attempt at the application. If the written word, even that of an aspiring philosopher, is necessarily playful, then so is the conversation of almost everyone, even of people who aspire to become great thinkers. That is to say, what almost all people say in conversation is typically not solid, clear, and complete. Speakers may have trouble answering questions and replying adequately to objections. All these defects come from the central defect that they do not know enough. As a result of their lack of knowledge, as a result of our lack of knowledge, there should be an element of play in our spoken speech, even about serious things. We must realize that what we say is often an experiment, provisional, an attempt that may prove true or false, a hypothesis to be examined, and then rejected without rancor if it should be refuted. We must realize that we should not take ourselves too seriously, that our honor is not at stake when we make an experiment in inquiry, that if we are serious about truth, then we cannot be competitive in dialogue, but must even be grateful to be refuted, because by being refuted we are shown that our opinion is false, or that we cannot defend it adequately, and therefore that we don't know it to be true. In other words, we must realize that in the game of conversation, being refuted is not an injurious attack, but can be a helpful medicine or an illuminating lesson. We can also understand the thinking of a solitary thinker as play. According to Socrates, thinking is the soul's dialogue with itself. In thinking, a person imitates another person who asks him questions, raises objections, comes at things from a different point of view from his own, and expresses opposing opinions. That is to say, genuine thinking creatively and playfully imitates an interlocutor. Let's get that. So I think it's very important to stress that Plato thinks that the pursuit of truth or knowledge is serious that we ought to pursue knowledge, and that knowledge is possible. If we do not bear this in mind, then we may think that Plato is playful because he is a skeptic who doesn't believe in the possibility of knowledge. There are plenty of people who are frivolously playful in discussing serious things because they feel confident that no one can know anything about these things. But it is almost impossible to be serious when you think that you are totally in the dark about what to think or how to live. Now, most of you know that Plato often mocks and criticizes people who think that they know important things that they do not know. But he also criticizes people who think that they know that knowledge of important things should not be sought because they think such knowledge is impossible. In other words, Plato is very critical of skepticism. I will give you a loose interpretation of his criticism of skepticism. In order to rule out the possibility of knowledge, one would need to know many things, namely, what knowledge is, what resources the human mind has, even hidden resources, and what about this or that reality makes it hard to know. But that is an amazing amount of important and difficult things to know. How could the skeptic know so much and still be a skeptic? Therefore, according to Plato, thinking one knows that nothing solid can be known is precisely to think that one is wise when one is not. It is thinking that one knows what one does not in fact know. To be an extreme skeptic might seem to be modest and humble, but in fact, Socrates thinks that it is presumptuous to claim that one knows the rigid limits of human knowledge. It is much more humble and reasonable to be skeptical about one's own skepticism, and not to blame human nature itself for one's failures in inquiry. Instead, one should blame oneself for not seeking knowledge as well as one might have, and then leave open the possibility that reality holds surprises, even the surprise that we can know things deeply if we apply ourselves diligently and correctly to the task. So in short, if skeptics were as skeptical about their skepticism as they are about other things, there would be much fewer extreme skeptics in the world. There would be many fewer extreme skeptics in the world. Let's pull together some strands of our investigation. The right way to think is to honor and care for truth, and to seriously seek it. It is not to take one's mere opinions too seriously. Thinking well is not a competition that one tries to win, or a performance in which one shows off and seeks honor rather than truth. Instead, thinking is something like playful practice, in which one is preparing oneself to learn more. But of course, a surprise may occur, and the thinker in training may unexpectedly learn something deep and important. So another image might be that thinking is like an athletic practice in which you can win a world championship, or in which you can set the world record. If that happens, great. If it doesn't, that's okay, because one is merely practicing. Thus, thinking also requires patience. I think probably patience and play are deeply related, but I didn't think about that until now. Let us come at how to balance play and seriousness in yet another way. This balance is a matter of priorities. One strives to be serious about the most important things, and to be playful about less important or unimportant things. I might add here that I think Plato in general thinks people get everything backwards. We're playful about serious things and serious about playful things. Some things are in between being playful or serious, because in themselves they are not serious, but they can be means to serious things, or can express or imitate serious things. In that case, the artful combiner of play and seriousness is serious and playful about the same things, but in different respects. Insofar as something is a means to, or imitation of, worthy things, one is somewhat serious about it, but insofar as it is not important in itself, one plays with it. I'm about to cover something big in a very quick way. So to be playful and serious in the right ways involves not just being aware that I'm to be serious about this, and playful about that. I must put seriousness and playfulness correctly into practice by the manner that I act, think, speak, and feel. We say that in art, one should seek to make the form and content match, or to make the form reflect the content. Similarly, in life, the form, mode, or manner of one's words and deeds should properly express seriousness and playfulness in the right ways. Okay, so I'm going to finish up by considering a lengthy quotation. It's the last one in the handout. So I've made this rough and ready distinction between philosophical play and non-philosophical play. And I think there are really important differences between them, but I'm going to argue that according to this passage, there are important similarities between them as well. In order to see some of these, we'll read the passage. The greatest of all evils, this is from the Laws, the greatest of all evils for the mass of human beings is something which grows naturally in the soul, and everyone, by excusing it in himself, fails to devise any way to escape it. This is shown by the way people talk, when they say that every human being is by nature a friend to himself, and that it is correct that he should be so. The truth is that the excessive friendship for oneself is the cause of all of each man's wrongdoings on every occasion. Everyone who cares for something is blind when it comes to the thing cared for, and hence is a poor judge of what is just and good and noble, because he believes that he should always honor his own more than the truth. Yet a man who is to attain greatness must be devoted not to himself or to what belongs to him, but to what is just, whether it happens to be done by himself or by someone else. This same failing is the source of everyone's supposing his lack of learning is wisdom. As a result, we think we know everything when in fact we know, so to speak, nothing. And when we refuse to turn over to others what we don't know how to do, we necessarily go wrong by trying to do them ourselves. So every human being should flee excessive self-love and should always pursue someone who is better than himself, without putting any feeling of shame in the way. So this passage places great emphasis on something like compliance with or submission to rulers and teachers. You might think that its talk about obedience applies only to ordinary people and not at all to philosophers or thinkers. But, I will argue, the passage applies at least partly to all human beings. The problem with human beings, according to the passage, is that they tend to be, and think it is right to be, their own friends, when in fact being one's own friend in the wrong way, or a foolish way, can lead to great harm. To be foolishly or wrongly one's own friend means thinking better of oneself than one should. It means thinking that one deserves more than one does, or that one is more important than he is. It means irrationally making an exception of oneself, favoritism towards oneself, or a lack of objectivity and strictness in judging oneself. In short, it means being too serious about oneself, or about the wrong things in oneself. As a result, the foolish self-lover lacks self-knowledge. He takes, expects, or demands more than he deserves, or than is good for him. The passage also talks about people who think that they know more than they do. They think that they are wise when they know almost nothing, or just that they're wiser than they actually are. This description describes a temptation, not just for ordinary people, but for aspiring thinkers too. But in order to think well, one must realize it when one is not wise, or when one doesn't know this or that. If it is a kind of self-love to want to think that one knows when one does not in fact know, It is a deeper kind of self-love to want to realize it when one is ignorant, in order to be in a position to learn. Moreover, by knowing that one doesn't know, or at least having good evidence for one's ignorance, a person has already begun to know something about the thing in question. Often one needs to know something about a thing in order to realize that one doesn't know other things about it. Often one learns that one does not understand something by thinking hard about it and beginning to understand a few things about it. Now, we can now understand the similarities between ordinary people who fail to be just because of excessive self-love and thinkers whose self-love makes them fail to realize it when they are not wise. Both kinds of people tend to take themselves too seriously, especially their honor, or the way they appear to other people. And as a result, they deludedly think that they know something when they do not, or presumptuously take something that is not theirs, or that they do not deserve. Instead of being false friends of themselves, who take themselves too seriously, they should try to treat themselves playfully, as imperfect beings, and seriously as beings who have the capacity to become more just or more wise. There is even a way in which the philosopher should be obedient to other people. Of course, a philosopher or an aspiring one should think for himself and not believe important things merely on the authority of other people. But he should nonetheless be happy to find people wiser than himself, either as a whole or in this or that respect. He should be happy to be led by someone who knows something that he doesn't, and to be refuted or rebuked, and to learn. For one can do all of this without surrendering one's judgment, and without believing something just because an authority says it. So in 10 minutes or so, 5 or 10 minutes, there'll be a question period right here, I think. And thank you for attending the lecture.